welcome to Access Middle East. I'm Yusuf Gamaluddin, coming to you from the 2013 YPO Global Leadership Summit in the Turkish city of Istanbul. Over 2,000 members from the Young Presidents Organization have gathered to discuss the major challenges facing CEOs today.
We're in the region faced with a youth bulge. It's really a demographic time bomb that the Arab world is faced with.
It's a huge market. There is a lot of talent. There is a fantastic purchase power.
The biggest challenge is, in fact, having people graduate with the right skills for the right job.
With nearly 55% of the Arab world under the age of 25, governments are now looking to the region's private sector to bridge the unemployment gap. Badr Jafar, CEO of Crescent Petroleum and chairman of YPO's UAE chapter, explains why.
We have a situation where you have an inflated government and public sector, which is simply not able to absorb all those jobs. So SMEs and new businesses is critical. In any developed economy in the world, the SME makeup is at least 70 to 80% of the overall economy. In the Arab world today, it's less than 20%. So that is something which is absolutely critical. It's investing in entrepreneurship to solve the crisis which we face related to job creation in the Arab world, and that can only be done as a stakeholder approach with the government as well as civil society. It has to be a stakeholder approach, because the private sector alone obviously cannot do that. We're in the region faced with a youth bulge. It's really a demographic time bomb that the Arab world is faced with. We need to create over 150 million jobs over the next 20 years, which is more than the Arab world has created over the last century.
But why hasn't this issue been resolved yet? We've been talking about this problem for a very long time, but they're still unable to make it really happen. From the conversations I've had with business leaders like yourself, it's not really gaining any traction. What needs to be done?
Well, sometimes crisis situations help catalyze solutions, and that's something which is happening at the moment. I do believe that governments and the private sector with the education systems are really developing. Now, apart from education, a huge aspect, of course, and challenge is access to capital. The access to capital for small and medium-sized enterprises in the Arab world makes up less than 8% of total access to capital. Now that needs to change, because if we're going to be all new net job creation, or the majority of new net job creation in America comes from small businesses. So if we're going to have our small businesses thriving, we need much better access to capital. And of course, there's advocacy, the ease of doing business. So the Arab world again suffers from, when you look at it as a region compared to the rest of the world, one of the most difficult places to set up a business today. Now these, in my opinions, are low-hanging fruit, because if we're able to make small improvements in that, I think we will see huge results.
Badr, when you look at the region, is there a particular country that stands out, that it provides a good role model?
I believe that the center of gravity of a lot of the economic development and opportunity is moving towards the Gulf region of the Arab world. Now, the Gulf region is also faced with huge incremental revenues when it comes to its oil production and of course its sales. Over the last few years, the incremental increase that the Gulf region has made as a result of the speculation on oil because of Arab Spring difficulties has been 300 to 400 billion US dollars. So there's huge opportunity to reinvest that money into creating jobs, but investing that money directly into small businesses.
But isn't it ironic that despite that oil wealth, the Gulf countries are still unable to give their citizens the tools they need to be competitive in the marketplace? Because at the end of the day, you as an employer are struggling to find people to join your business, let alone train them and secure them for long term.
It's a combination of many factors, and what you mentioned now is related to education. We are not training in our part of the world, the 350 million Arabs that exist, we're not training people for the right type of jobs. That's definitely a problem.
We as in the governments?
Not as the governments, our education systems. So the education systems need to be developed between the government sectors as well as the private sectors. There has to be feedback into that system. What you do need to make sure is that the workforce is actually being trained to be able to fit those job profiles. And that's something which, again, like I said, needs to happen in parallel with the educational sectors in the region. We need more education for employment in the Arab world today. And that's not a problem exclusive to the Arab world. I think there's a general recognition that our education systems in the world are falling behind the actual job requirements.
A Deloitte survey of oil and gas executives, just to get your industry into this, suggested the likelihood of, quote, a severe shortage of talent over the next year in virtually every functional category. How do you mitigate that risk from Crescent Petroleum's perspective?
Well, within Crescent Petroleum as well, what we try and do again is engage to ensure that we are not just training the existing talent pool that exists, but going directly again to universities. So, as you said, there is an impending crisis, but it's no longer, we can no longer rest on our laurels and hope that something will happen to improve that. It's time for action.
A heavy reliance on the public sector is one of the legacies of the 1970s oil boom in the Gulf. Nationals in this part of the world still prefer to work for the public sector in pursuit of perks that the private sector is just unable to offer. What solution do you propose to overcome these challenges?
That's a major challenge which exists today, and especially in a post sort of Arab Spring environment. Again, there has been some of the policies that we're shifting towards improving job creation in the private sector has somewhat reversed. So this is something which is critical, and I think, again, can only be dealt with on a stakeholder approach. One of the things that we are doing is trying to make sure that we're always cognizant of the packages that exist in the public sector, and not necessarily trying to match them, but trying to provide alternative incentives to get the workforce interested in the jobs that we're providing as well.
Badr, the Arab Spring has shown that simply introducing pro-market reforms is not necessarily a guarantor for inclusive economic growth. Political institutions, they need to develop as well. How would you say has the Gulf fared so far in that regard, since they have not seen the kind of political turmoil that happened, say, in Egypt?
Look, the Gulf region, again, as I've said, over the last decade or so, even prior to some of the issues which we've seen in recent years, has been really a move towards the center of gravity towards the Gulf region. So I think, and there are young economies and young governments also that exist in that region. I think our leaders are doing a great job at being able to attract new capital whilst realizing that it is in a very turbulent part of the Arab world. Something which I think is again a priority for our governments is promoting, beyond just entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship. Yeah. And that is really looking at the fabric of our business models and making sure that there are stakeholder approaches there. So dealing is really the triple bottom line, not just the profit element, but the people element and the planet element. So really changing the fabric of those business models, and in a way it's a revolution of capitalism in the region, which I genuinely feel is actually happening now.
Coming up.
First of all, it's not about money. We need to do some hard work in improving and enhancing the regulatory framework, because the regulatory framework in most of the Arab countries is not friendly towards entrepreneurs and SMEs.
We'll have more from the Young Presidents Organization next.